Bueno, ya pasaron las elecciones, creo que no hace falta que les diga que ganó Donald Trump, ya lo sabemos, va a iniciar un nuevo mandato que creo que es a partir del 10 de enero del año que viene. Y claro, a partir de ahí empezaron ya a la semana, a pocos días de haber ganado, empezaron todo tipo de especulaciones con respecto a lo que puede pasar en el futuro de la NASA, qué va a pasar con el SLS, qué va a pasar con Artemis, la Luna, Marte y sobre todo con esta relación tan cercana que se desarrolló durante la última fase de la campaña entre Trump y Elon Musk. Y el rol que va a jugar Elon como asesor o como parte del gobierno, todavía no lo sabemos, en tratar de eficientizar o minimizar los gastos del Estado y de muchas de las agencias, y probablemente incluida la NASA. Así que bueno, creo que la idea mía era hacer una especie de artículo o barra video para tratar de dar mi humilde opinión con lo que creo que puede llegar a pasar en los próximos meses. Así que empecé a investigar los websites que habitualmente consulto, leyendo artículos, tratando de ver realmente por dónde puede venir la mano. Y me cruzo con este artículo de Marcia Smith que habla sobre qué va a pasar con la nueva administración, ¿no? Y el programa espacial y la NASA en particular. Para los que no la conocen, Marcia la verdad es que es toda una autoridad en temas de política espacial. Ella es la editora y la fundadora de Space Policy Online o Política Espacial en línea. Marcia lleva como 40 años dedicada a política espacial y realmente al ver su artículo yo dije, bueno, mejor la llamo, hablo con ella, nos hemos cruzado muchas veces en el sitio de prensa, así que qué mejor que hablar con ella directamente para hacer una especie de ping pong y ver qué piensa sobre lo que puede llegar a pasar con el SLS en el futuro de la NASA o mismo con el proyecto Artemis, la Luna, Marte. Así que bueno, es una charla de 10-15 minutos. Y después creo que quédense porque después sigo yo con algunos comentarios finales. Marcia, how are you? Thank you so much for giving me a couple of minutes.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You know, I was in the past few days I was thinking in writing an article/video about what this new administration could mean for NASA, for SLS, for Artemis. Has been, you know, a lot of discussion. This is going to be canceled, this is going to be this way, and the budget. And then I came across your article and said, oh, okay, maybe I can talk about Marcia's article. And I said, wait, instead of talking about Marcia's article, why don't you call her directly and have a conversation about it? So I think that's why I decided to, this is your article, Artemis and the new administration. So, wow, we have interesting months ahead, right?
To say the least.
And I see your article based on this panel taking place on the Beyond Earth Symposium.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Were you there?
I was there.
And I don't know, it's by reading your article, which is great, full of information, I have this sensation that, I don't know, among all the speculation that the new administration could have a direct impact in canceling or choosing an alternative route to going to the moon, I see that there's a new narrative like, oh, we don't know how much water is on the moon. Right. And instead of, because canceling SLS, you are the expert on this, but it would be like a direct confrontation with Congress. And a lot of people in Congress that represent from, let me see, from Mississippi, from Alabama, from Iowa, from Florida, thousands of people working on these different NASA centers. But then changing the narrative and saying, wait a minute, guys, you know what? We don't know how much water is on the moon. So let's keep it. Let's go to Mars. Am I being paranoid or is that a possibility?
Well, I see them as sort of separate issues. So there's the question about SLS, which has been controversial from the beginning. It was created by Congress after President Obama decided to cancel the Constellation program, and powerful members of Congress from some of those states, Texas, Florida, and Alabama in that case, said, no, you must build a big new rocket. It doesn't have to be the same big new rocket, but you need to build a big new rocket and a crew capsule to go on top of it. And President Obama, you can also do what you want to do, which was the Commercial Crew Program. But that's how SLS came into being. And a large impetus for it was that the space shuttle had just been terminated, and there were workers who had nowhere to go if there wasn't going to be an SLS. So when you're looking at it in today's environment, here we are in 2024, and a lot has changed. So you have SpaceX, which is hiring a lot of people, and Blue Origin is hiring a lot of people. So the job consequences of canceling SLS would be different today than they were back in 2010. Whether it's different enough for it to lose enough support in Congress, I'm really not sure.
Right.
But I think it's, from my perspective, it's not so much that they would just cancel SLS entirely, but they would most likely cancel the advanced versions of it, like the Block 1B, which has been very controversial because it's taking a long time, and they had to build this new mobile transporter for it, which is way over cost. And so I guess I'm a little bit skeptical personally that they would just outright cancel SLS, but I would not be surprised if they did not proceed with the bigger versions of it and instead looked at alternatives, commercial alternatives. And so, if those companies come along and they want to hire the workers, then I think there'll be less demand from Congress to keep the government program going. That's
so you don't see a direct link between the fact that we don't know how much water is on the moon, so we don't know if it's economically viable, with the fact that SLS is extremely expensive, which is it's obvious.
I see them really as separate issues. I think that what Brent Sherwood was bringing up was a really interesting question, because you hear people talk about, how much water there is in the South Pole and everything based on the very limited data that we have. But the whole reason that they were building Viper was to go and actually take a look, and not just to find out how much water there is, but how difficult it would be to extract.
Extract it, yeah.
So, I've heard it described as being, it's like having water in concrete. Yes, there's water in concrete, but trying to get that water out of the concrete is not easy. And doing that at minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit, or whatever the temperature is in those permanently shadowed craters, is another challenge. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about what might be there, and there's speculation about how much is there. But as Brent Sherwood pointed out, the underpinning of the enthusiasm for Artemis is that there's going to be this sustained presence, and they're going to be extracting minerals and building outposts and creating fuel for going on to Mars, but we really don't have a handle on how much is there. And so wouldn't you want to, as a first step, send robots like Viper to get answers to those questions before investing a great deal more into the program? So I think that's what he was trying to bring up, that there seemed to be a disconnect at NASA between canceling Viper, which was going to go and start getting those answers, and yet still proceeding apace with Artemis. I think that was the point he was trying to make.
So we don't know what's going to happen, but we probably see like a moderate approach and said, okay, we're going to use SLS for Artemis 2, Artemis 3, but we're not going to see the next version of SLS, and we can see what the private companies between Starship, between New Glenn, and other providers can bring to the table.
Yeah, that's one possible approach. I think what's going on right now is just all the uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen. They know that Elon Musk has a direct line to the president. The president is relying on him for other things. The bigger question of how much money should the federal government have in the first place to spend, because this commission that he's working on with Vivek Ramaswamy is looking at cutting the size of government and cutting government spending. And I don't think NASA is going to be exempted from that. So trying to accelerate human expeditions to Mars and do Artemis seems pretty formidable in a challenging budget environment. There are people, and I've not heard any of this recently, but I've heard it in the past, that NASA really should be a human spaceflight agency, and the science things should go over to the National Science Foundation, and technology should be developed elsewhere. And so so if you cut NASA's funding, you could focus all on human spaceflight and do them both. But that's not ever been popular on Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill has always emphasized in the NASA authorization bills that you need a balanced NASA program that does human spaceflight, technology, science, and aeronautics, and they don't want to see any one of those overwhelming the others. So, Congress is changing, and Congress has changed a lot since 2010 when they got SLS approved, and all the members who did that, Kay Bailey Hutchinson from Texas and Richard Shelby from Alabama and Bill Nelson, currently NASA administrator, but the outgoing NASA administrator, they're not in Congress anymore. And I don't know if that enthusiasm
is still there.
NASA is still there. NASA has always been a bipartisan issue. I will say that, with the exception of earth science. Earth science has always been a partisan issue between Republicans are not so enthusiastic about NASA's earth science program, but in everything else, it's been bipartisan. But with this new Congress, it's tough to say what's going to happen.
I was showing this a piece of your article, which is so good. It says Musk is building one of the human landing systems to transport astronauts back to the moon. But Trump, as well as Musk, which is basically the mission of the SpaceX mission is basically Mars. It's the reason.
That's his passion.
That's his passion. But the thing is, with Musk now in high spheres of the government, it looks more like, okay, we can create a straight path to Mars. But I don't know. You know what? That's a point of view I would like to have from you. Is like how this could be a conflict of interest with Musk being part of the government or no, depending on what figure he's going to occupy on the government. A consultant or part of the government, we still don't know yet, I guess.
Well, as far as I know, he's not going to become a government employee, but he is going to be a consultant, so to speak. Again, I don't think he's going to get paid by the government, but he's going to have a lot of influence on what the government does. And there's been this debate for decades. I mean, really since 1972, do we go back to the moon or just onto Mars? Mm-hmm. People like Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins, when he was still alive, said, we've been to the moon. We don't need to go back. Let's just focus on Mars. And there is a contingent. And when Obama canceled Constellation, he said, let's forget about the moon and just go on to Mars. And he envisioned people orbiting Mars, not landing on Mars, but orbiting Mars in the 2030s. And that did spark some reaction in Congress. And so there are members of Congress today who keep insisting that going back to the moon is just as a stepping stone to Mars. They don't want NASA staying on the moon any longer than it has to learn whatever we need to learn before we send people to Mars. Mars is still the horizon goal, as they call it. And I think that if they saw a way to accelerate human expeditions to Mars without increasing the risk to human lives, they might buy into that. But we don't know how to protect humans right now. And so it's a matter of how much risk. And are you sending people there and you're going to, how could you just leave them there on their first trip? You've got to have a lot of infrastructure to support them. There's no air, there's no water. There's no food, there's nothing there. So you can't, Musk talks about sending humans to Mars in 2028 if these uncrewed missions in 2026 work out. But that just seems completely unrealistic because you're not going to have time to send all the infrastructure ahead to support them. So, NASA talks about humans to Mars, in the 2040s. Musk is talking 2028. Trump is enthusiastic about Mars. He did sign a space policy directive his first year in office, the first time, restoring moon to the plan, because Obama had taken the moon out and he put it back in. But what you put back in, you can take out again. So again, I think it's just the uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And so they're worrying about the worst thing happening. And that is basically changing the current plan, because we've had so many ups and downs and ups and downs and ons and offs and everything over the decades. There are a lot of people, they just want, they call it constancy of purpose. And some people say, well, we really want constancy of program, but whatever you want to call it, they don't want another sea change because there's a new president coming in.
Well, Whatever happens, I think one thing is for sure. This is something that I've been listening in a few days with between Wen Shotwell on the Barron's Finance Conference, and that we need faster, simpler regulation. Obviously, right? And I saw this Congressman, Republican Kevin Kiley. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correct. Kevin Kiley introducing this legislation to move the office commercial space under taking it out of the FAS jurisdiction. Do you think this is possible?
Well, somewhat ironically, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation was created to be part of the Office of the Secretary of Transportation. And over the years, it was sort of demoted into the FAA, and there are people who've been trying to get it elevated back up to the Secretary's office. So I'm not sure that moving it up to the Secretary's office is going to make much of a difference in terms of how quickly the regulatory system operates. But I think that there's wide agreement that it would be good for all regulations to get accomplished more quickly. And, it's a process. And you can have heads of agencies tell their employees, you got to move this more quickly. But like the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation is not a standalone entity when it's approving things like launches from Boca Chica, because they're part of an interagency process that includes the Environmental Protection Agency. And so they have to wait for those entities to do their job. So there certainly could be ways to speed up the whole regulatory process, but I don't know it's going to make any difference if it's part of the FAA or part of the Secretary of Transportation's office.
Marcia, thank you so much. Definitely incredible times coming ahead. We don't know exactly what is going to happen, which is sometimes it's good or sometimes it's not, but it's going to be quite interesting. So thank you again. And maybe we can have another chat in a couple of months to see what's going on.
Absolutely. See what happens.
Thank you, Marcia.
Okay, thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Disfruté mucho de la charla con Marcia porque me hizo, fíjense, tiene la experiencia, con la experiencia que tiene me hizo ver o entender las cosas de otra manera. Por ejemplo, ella separa el tema de que no sabemos cuánta agua hay en la Luna con respecto a la cancelación de SLS. Yo en ese momento, cuando leí el artículo de ella, lo até porque uno de los panelistas decía, no sabemos cuánta agua hay en la Luna. Y la NASA permanentemente con esta narrativa de que el agua en el polo sur de la Luna nos va a permitir crear un ecosistema económico importante, no solamente con la NASA yendo allí con misiones tripuladas, sino además con muchísimas empresas comerciales tratando de hacer diferentes actividades. Fíjense esta placa de Bryce Tech, la cantidad de empresas, esperen que la voy a poner en, aquí está, la cantidad de empresas que están como en la gatera esperando que se empiece a desarrollar esta especie de ecosistema cislunar. Fíjense, desde cargo y de transporte, por supuesto lanzamiento, SpaceX, Blue Origin, ULA, Rocket Lab. Después tenemos los rovers, gente que hace rovers y landers para la Luna, un montón de empresas. Trajes espaciales, lo que es servicios o utilities, desde Nokia, esperando para hacer comunicaciones en la superficie de la Luna, mantenimiento y servicio, minería. Hay un montón, todas estas empresas están como a la expectativa de qué está pasando en el polo sur de la Luna y cuando se empiece realmente la parte pesada del proyecto Artemis. Pero si no sabemos a ciencia cierta cuánta agua hay y encima la NASA cancela la única misión que estos años iba a averiguar exactamente, ¿hay agua? ¿Cuánta cantidad de agua puede llegar a haber haciendo una especie de proyección? Pero en el lugar donde explore, ¿cuánta agua puede llegar a haber en el polo sur de la Luna y qué tan fácil es extraerla? Entonces yo lo que hice fue atar y decir, uy, esto puede ser utilizado por la nueva administración para decir, momento, no hace falta que tengamos un tremendo cohete cuando no sabemos en realidad cuánta agua hay en la Luna. Primero vamos a mandar de a poco y entender cuánta agua hay para después saber qué economía es viable. Pero no, Marcia lo ve diferente, dice no, el SLS es otra historia diferente a el tema del agua en la Luna, que también es importante. Y otra cosa que me mencionó, súper interesante, es que cancelar SLS hoy no tiene la gravedad de cancelarlo 10 años atrás o en el 2010. Como ella bien dijo, el SLS fue creado básicamente para que muchos de los trabajadores del Space Shuttle sigan en otro proyecto. Cuando el Congreso le dijo a la NASA, no, hay que construir un cohete grande que tenga su propia cápsula y que Estados Unidos necesita un cohete grande más allá de de las actividades comerciales o los Falcon 9 o las empresas que vengan. Estados Unidos tiene que tener un cohete heavy lifter. Evidentemente, ese problema de suplir trabajos ya no es hoy tan grave, porque hoy, para que tengamos una idea, SpaceX tiene más de 15.000 empleados, personas trabajando. Blue Origin debe tener otras miles de tantos. Quién sabe Firefly, quién sabe Rocket Lab. Por lo tanto, hoy hay un mercado laboral muy importante creado por el commercial space o todas las empresas comerciales. Por lo tanto, si el Congreso lo único que le preocupa es me quedo sin darle trabajo a la gente y por lo tanto mi voto peligra porque en esos centros de la NASA, en Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, puedo verme perjudicado. Bueno, no, ojo, porque SpaceX está generando una cantidad de empleos impresionante en California, Texas, Florida. Otro hace Rocket Lab, otro más hace Firefly, Blue Origin, que Washington State, que Florida. Hay muchas empresas que ya están generando trabajo y si alguna de esas personas de SLS pueden ser absorbidas por SpaceX, por Blue Origin, por Rocket Lab, por Firefly, mejor todavía. Por lo tanto, las condiciones no son tan graves. Lo que sí creo que estoy de acuerdo con Marcia, y creo, díganme a ver qué opinan en los comentarios, creo que en vez de hacer una especie de delete del SLS o de cancelar completamente el programa, me parece que lo más lógico es que cancelen la versión siguiente que va a venir. Ustedes saben que la NASA tiene varias versiones del SLS en miras y la versión que le sigue es el bloque 1B, la que tiene en su parte superior como segunda etapa la Exploration Upper Stage o la etapa superior exploratoria, exploradora, que tiene muchísima más capacidad que la versión actual del SLS que está desarrollado por ULA. Esta versión interina criogénica, la segunda etapa, que es la que se utilizó para Artemis 1, la que se va a utilizar para Artemis 2. Pero quizás esta versión, para cuando esté por concretarse, cuando esté por ya empezarse a construir, probablemente, no sé si ya se está construyendo, pero probablemente cuando esté por terminar ya tengamos operativos cohetes como Starship, cohetes como New Glenn, que cada vez que hace una prueba Starship avanza a pasos agigantados. New Glenn está a punto de lanzar, así que no nos sorprenda que de acá a dos o 3 años estos dos sistemas estén operativos y que entonces quizás ya lo que pueda traer las empresas comerciales al mercado sea muy diferente de lo que existía hace 10 años. Por lo tanto, no veo tan descabellado que realmente esta segunda fase del SLS se descarte y que se pueda empezar a generar alternativas con la parte comercial. Después está la parte regulatoria, que creo que acá creo que no hay nadie que no esté de acuerdo en tratar de minimizar y hacer mucho más eficientes las regulaciones. Y creo que hasta la misma FAA, la Administración Federal de Aviación, lo sabe, está trabajando para eso. Y la verdad es que esta propuesta de este representante, yo no sé si es diputado o senador, no recuerdo ahora, pero el hecho de sacar a la oficina a la Office of Commercial Space Transportation, vendría a ser la oficina de transporte comercial espacial, sacarla del ala del FAA para ponerla en forma separada, como estaba en sus inicios. Como decía Marcia, yo no sé hasta qué punto va a ser suficiente, porque la verdad es que lo que habría que hacer es darle, si esa misma oficina sale del ala del FAA y va a hacer el mismo trabajo afuera con los mismos recursos, estamos en la misma. Creo que lo que hay que hacer es tratar de darle más recursos a esta oficina dedicada al espacio dentro de la FAA y que gente con experiencia y que gente que trate de trabajar para minimizar y simplificar las regulaciones. Wayne Shotwell, la presidente, la COO de SpaceX, hasta hace unos días habló en esta conferencia de finanzas de Barron Capital y hasta ella misma comentaba, bueno, miren lo que dijo.
Now that Elon Musk has taken a role in the government, specifically the Department of Government Efficiency, will the regulation be easier?
I think the hope, by the way, is with this administration and this committee and probably others, I think everyone is starting to recognize in all industries that regulation really needs to be reinvented. And so I certainly hope, I probably spend more than half my time working regulatory issues. And I would love to be spending that time, you know, meeting with my welders and meeting with the folks building Starlinks and Starships. So it's certainly the hope that we can figure out together how we make the regulatory organizations more efficient, make the regulations more efficient, and frankly, better, not just faster, but better. And yet the regulation for launch is, you know, thousands of pages if you were to read all the details and all the things that go into it. So simplifying, focusing on what's really important, and sticking to that. Don't go off on tangents and science projects. Interesting, rockets are fascinating. But really stick to the one thing that matters, really the one thing that you're trying to regulate for, and that is to make sure you don't hurt people.
Es tal cual, o sea, a ella le gustaría estar más tiempo con sus soldadores, con sus técnicos, con sus directores, y en vez de estar gran parte de su tiempo metida en regulación. Es una locura. No solamente para SpaceX o un Blue Origin, sino para una empresa que quiere lanzar por primera vez, tiene que estar lidiando con miles de papeleos. Y nadie dice que minimizarlo sea que sea menos seguro. Al contrario, creo que la seguridad siempre tiene que ser primordial, pero tratar de hacerlo de una forma más eficiente y simple, para que nuevos emprendedores y nuevas empresas lleguen y se incorporen al mercado. Si no, va a ser muy complicado expandirlo. Y por supuesto el papel que va a jugar Elon Musk, que no lo sabemos. No lo sabemos. Lo que es definitivamente algo seguro es que no sea parte del gobierno, porque si es empleado del gobierno, prácticamente él estaría obligado a dar un paso al costado como CEO de SpaceX y fundador de la empresa, porque él al ser un consultor tan cercano al presidente, tener prácticamente el oído del presidente y decirle no solamente lo que puede hacer con muchas agencias del gobierno, sino con la NASA, y siendo SpaceX el principal proveedor de la NASA en muchos aspectos espaciales. Hoy tengan en cuenta que la NASA y el gobierno de los Estados Unidos es el principal cliente de SpaceX, a nivel civil con la NASA y a nivel militar con el Departamento de Defensa. O sea que va a ser muy complicado que él sea empleado del gobierno. Va a tener que ser una especie de consultor para que no haya un problema legal de por medio. Pero bueno, van a pasar muchas cosas de acá varios meses. Y otra cosa fundamental, falta el administrador de la NASA. Bill Nelson está prácticamente de retirada. Creo que ha hecho un muy buen trabajo y hay varios nombres dando vueltas por ahí, pero va a ser Donald Trump quien tenga que definir quién va a ser el nuevo administrador. Y hay que ver cómo va a ser la relación entre el nuevo administrador, el presidente e Elon Musk. Porque hay que ver si el administrador va a recibir de buena manera estos recortes para poder eficientizar y ser ahorrar presupuesto, pero recordemos también que el presupuesto de la NASA es el 0.3% de todo el presupuesto de los Estados Unidos. No es nada. Ojalá que un sueño sería que si el trabajo de Elon Musk en términos de eficientizar agencias del Estado y ver de cortar grasa por muchos lugares donde puede haber duplicación de trabajos y presupuesto, pueda traerlo hacia la parte de exploración espacial, sería realmente muy bienvenida, porque la verdad es que seguir cortando presupuesto a la NASA, que se puede eficientizar y ser menos burocrático y ser, por supuesto, eso en cualquier lugar del mundo, cualquier gobierno, pero cortar presupuesto a la NASA va a ser complicado, porque la verdad que hoy por hoy es mínimo. Vienen meses interesantes, podrán ser dramáticos, pero que vienen meses interesantes seguro. Decime qué opinás abajo en los comentarios. No te olvides de suscribirte al canal si te gusta el contenido. Esto nos ayuda muchísimo. Dale like al video, a la campanita para que te avise cuando subimos otro. Así que yo sabés que trato de contestar todos los comentarios en la medida que pueda, los contesto todos. Así que me va a gustar saber qué pensás. Hay que liquidar el SLS de plano, todas las versiones. Pero ¿con qué nos quedamos? ¿Cómo llegamos a la Luna? ¿Arriba de qué? ¿Hay que cambiar horario, o la cápsula Orión, ponerla o sea, lo veo complicado, pero decime qué opinás y nos vemos en la próxima.